In this project, I'm looking at the workflows between Maya and Unity. How to bring art assets from Maya into Unity at the right size and scale with the textures intact, and working out which way you want the normals to be within the software. Also to set up the projects correctly so that you don't lose things between sessions on working with them. So Unity I've got open right away. To start off, I'm going to create a new project. So I'll click on the New tab under Projects here. I'll just type in a name for it. And it has a location where I'm going to save it. I'm working in 3D, so I'm using the 3D template, and I can just click Create Project, and that will save it to my development folder that I'm working to. Now that'll take a little while to set up the packages it needs, the standard packages that will create a Unity folder for me. I can see what it's doing if I look in the Finder or the Explorer if you're on Windows, and I can find that file and just see what it's saving. So I've got it Quickstart. It's supposed to be Quickstart, but you can see it's set up these folders here. Now all the user assets and artwork go into this assets folder here, and it's got a scenes folder, and that's where it's going to save the main project scenes as you're working through. You see Unity here, it's got a little icon on it. It's got a pie slice that's going around, so it's done about a quarter of what it needs to do. So we'll leave that for a moment to set up, and what we'll do, we'll go across to Maya and look at how those scenes work in there as well. So what I've set up with Maya previously is to be in the modeling tab here. The modeling tab changes this menu sets tab changes the menus here. So you see that in animation, I've got options for keying on the menus here, but actually I'm just going to stay in the modeling menu because that gives me several options for working with models and also with textures, UV textures. I've also got the workspace set to be modeling standard. So if I change that here, go to Maya Classic, which is what happens when it opens up, I have a timeline in the base here, and that's for animation. So I'm not doing animation, so I'm going to take that off by just going to Modeling Standard. And if I was working with UVs as well, I can go to UV Editing. But Modeling Standard just gives me a bit more space in the viewport here, which is what I'm working with. Now one of the first things I want to do is test how to work with the scale. So before I do that, I need to set up a project. So I can go to the File menu and Set Project. Now this will give me an option. It's in the folder that I worked with previously, but I want to create a new folder, and I will call that Quickstart Maya. And this is where I'll save all of my Maya files. If I select that folder, we'll try and open it, and then set that as my project directory. It asks me if I want to create a default workspace. Now this is just Maya's file, which is a workspace.mel file, which will be inside that folder, and that will contain some information about the project. Now also, to make this a bit neater, I can go into the project window after I set the project, and I can set up folders for all the things I'm working with. Now in this video we're going to use the scenes folder, source images folder, and those are the main ones. So we'll just accept all of them, and this makes when you get a very large project, you can get 100,000 files within one project. So you really want to start working with it straight away. Now a quick look at the Maya software. If you haven't used this before, it can be quite daunting, but just remember to pick a single menu set here, and looking at the workspaces as well. Now on the right you have all the information you might want to use, and also a toolkit. So you've got a modeling toolkit here, an attribute editor which shows you the attributes, and you can access these from these windows as well. So you've got these kind of tool settings, modeling toolkit, attribute editor. You can select those from the icons on the top right here if they're not there already. Nothing's showing up on the attribute editor because I haven't got any objects in my scene yet. On the left here I've got other tools. So these top three are select tools. So you can select by clicking or lassoing and painting. You've also got the move, the rotate and the scale tool. So by selecting those, you're able to manipulate different objects. So this viewport here, if I create an object from the create menu, will show all of the items in my scene. So I'm going to go to create Polygon primitives cube and click on that there. And you can see in this window a small cube which is 1 unit in each dimension. I can check that by clicking on the attribute editor while I have that selected. If I deselect it, it goes. If I select it by left clicking, it comes back. So the scale is 1 across the X, Y and Z axes. And also the other aspects I can look at, if I look at the way it's created, it has a unit of 1 when it was created. Now, if I want different shapes, I can actually change this in here. But I'll leave it at 1 for now because that's going to be useful for the demonstration. Also, if I want to move it, I can select the move tool and I can select a single aspect of that using these gizmo tools, or I can pick it up in the middle and get a slightly random way of moving it. So I do advise working with these single dimensions when you're moving it. So I'll put it back in the center and similarly rotate. You click on a single color, green, red or blue, to make it move in either the X, Y or Z, and scale. There's a single dimension on each of the colors. But if you click the middle one, which is normally yellow, it does a uniform scale for all of them. So I've undone that using the Control or Apple Z. And if I want to move around in this viewport, this is exactly the same in Maya and in Unity. I press the Alt key on the keyboard, and if I use the left mouse button, it will orbit around the object that's in the center of the screen. If I use the middle mouse button, which is the scroll wheel, hold that down, it will pan along, and if I use the right mouse button, dragging forwards and backwards, it will scale in. Now sometimes if you're not on center with your object, it can disappear off the screen or behave a little bit erratically. So the other thing to remember is in both Maya and Unity, if you've selected an object and press F on the keyboard, that will focus it in the center of your screen. That's a real quick look at how to navigate the viewports. But what we're really looking at here is how we bring this object from Maya into Unity. So if I go back to Unity now, I see that I have my project set up. And this is very similar in a lot of ways. I have a scene file, a scene window, a game window which actually shows what someone will look at when they play the game, but the scene is where we're constructing it. Within that, we can see the hierarchy here has all the elements inside it as well. So I've got a main camera and a directional light. So those are the two things that are in there. If I click on the camera, I see the preview of what the camera is. And that's the same as this game scene as well. But if I'm constructing and I might want to move these around, I can use these move, rotate and scale tools just as I did within Maya. I also have the numbers up here. If I want to move it numerically, I can do position, rotation and scale in X, Y and Z axis for each object that I select. So the other aspect is when I was showing you the asset folder is the project window. So this project window here, I have mine set to 1 column layout, but you may see it in a 2 column layout as well, where it has folders and you can see the different aspects to that as well. My preference is 1 column layout, and I can see that all in line and open up those aspects as we go. So the first thing to do is to check the scale, that I'm working to the same scale. So whatever model I make in Maya will come across to Unity in the correct way. So I've created a scene. I'm just going to save that, cube 001, and I'm going to save that into my scenes folder in here. So that's saved it within the Maya folder. So if I do that again, if I do save scene as, you can see here I've got, if I go to workspace root on the left here, the current project, that will show me the folders, and if I set up the project right, that'll be in there. So don't forget to set the project at the beginning of each session, especially when you're working with textures. With that object selected, so if I left click, select that object. I can go to File, Send to Unity. You can send the whole scene or you can send the selection. But first of all, I need to set the Unity project. I need to tell this software where the Unity project is. So I'm going to open up the folder which contains the Unity aspects. It's actually selecting the library folder there. So I'll remove that and press select. So it's the root of the Unity project. Now I can go to Send to Unity, Selection, and this will send over an FBX export of my item. Now at the moment it says user defined, but I'm going to set that back to the default settings, which will be what you have initially when you load this up. So if I save that as cube-001, I can save that into that assets folder, and it's gone over already. So I can see that that's gone, and when I come over to Unity, it comes into this window here in the main project. If I wanted to have it in a different folder, and I can just call it My Models there, I can move that manually from the project window, and that will reorder how that is and neaten up my project. So the thing I really want to test is this the same size in Maya as it is in Unity? So I'll create a cube there. I am going to take the Move tool and move that to the side slightly, because when I drop in this cube, I want to be able to see both at once. So I'm going to drag from the project window into the hierarchy this cube, and I can see there actually isn't a cube there at all, but if I press F on the keyboard while I have that selected, I can see that it's come down very slow. Now this is because Maya has centimeters as a unit and Unity is working in meters. I can fix this by scaling up my object. That's possibly too large. If I just seems like I've gone the other way. No, that's right. So that matches it. So it's 100 times bigger, the items in Unity, the scales in Unity than in Maya. So I'm just going to take that out. I can select on the object in the hierarchy, press backspace or delete, or right click it and press delete, and that will disappear. So I just want to get this right from Maya, so I'm working in the right scale in Maya as well. So what I can do now is I can change this polycube. If I change that to be 100 centimeters wide, 100 centimeters high and 100 centimeters deep, then I will be working, if I zoom out slightly, be working in the right parameters. So I've actually gone inside the cube there. If I press F, it will focus itself. So I'm not actually seeing the grid in there, but I am getting a correct size object. So if I save this scene, I do a save as, save the scene as number 2, and then I can send that to Unity. Into the My Models folder, and I just want to change the name, so I'm selecting that name there, changing that and doing an export selection. So this time when I get the cube 2, I should be able to drag that into the scene, and that will be the correct scale. Now sometimes you may not be creating these models yourself, and it may be something that has been downloaded or another artist has created. So we can actually adjust these on the import settings within Unity as well. So it's good to work at the right size if you can. But if I look at that object there and click on it in the project window, I actually have a method in which I can change this here as well. So this is convert units 1 centimeter file to 0.01 meters in Unity. So that's telling me the scale that it's worked to. So I could change the Unity settings, but often I will get complex models made up of very different pieces, And so just changing the import settings for it will bring that up to the right size as well. So this is a very simple object, but if I have too many objects in a scene that's made, I won't want to be working with that. So then I really want to kind of work on what is that the right scale? Why have I decided that's the right scale? And it's really because some of the preset items within Unity would demand that. So if you haven't already got downloaded the standard assets, go to the asset store here. You will need to log in to use the asset store. I'm just going to change that to be bigger. So the asset store for Unity is somewhere where they sell or give away items that you can use in Unity, pre-made items that save you a lot of development time. So within this, I am actually logged in already, but you can search for things that you might want to use. If I look at my assets, I can see several very useful assets that I'm working with. I'm going to skip that for now. But I've got a piece here called an asset here called FBX Exporter. And once you've got these in, you can use them as well. So FBX Exporter allows you to export objects from Unity as FBX. A Unity Recorder that allows you to record video from within your scene. SteamVR plugins. This is some standard plugins to help you work with the Vive and Oculus. Unity sample user interfaces that allows you to work with or gives you some examples of user interfaces. Unity samples UI. iTween, which is an animation system for coding animation, and standard assets. Now these are all free, these ones I've selected here. So once you've got them in, you can download these and we can use these in different ways. So I'm just clicking download on all of them. The iTween came in very quickly. But what we're actually looking for now is the standard assets one. So if you haven't got it's downloaded it and decrypting it, so it's got encryption as it comes across the internet. So I'll just let it process that. But if you haven't got standard assets, this is something you'll need for this example. And what you can do, you can search for that here. And if I press enter, that'll give me a search list of all the elements I've got that are available for that. And within this I can get the information about it. So this one here has first person controllers, some vehicle controllers, and this also gives me the idea of the scale to which people are working in Unity. So if I use a first person controller, I can walk around a scene and I can feel whether it's the right size or not. This is just another way of working out the scale of what I'm working with. So I was told it to import, and it gives me the options of which parts I want to import, and I'll bring that in. And this should come into my project window down here. Now from here we'll be able to start building a system that runs, and we can work more on the workflow to bring our own artwork into Unity after we've blocked out a scene that will actually run. While that's importing, I'm going to go to Maya. I'm just going to show you another stage of working in Maya that we need to get to grips with. Now, as I said, within the project folders, we have a source images folder. So I'm going to just find a new item that I'm going to be working with. And so if I want to add a texture to an object, I just want to make sure that that flows between the two aspects as well. So I'm going to download a free one for an example, and I'm using royalty free or Creative Commons license ones. So I'm going to opengameart.org, and what I'm looking for, if I go to the Browse tab, is textures. Textures are bitmap images or just photographs or two-dimensional graphics that will allow me to map images onto an object. So I'm just going to choose this one here, free tiling textures, number pack 35, and that has these images in them within there. So we can see the previews there, and we can also go back and download the whole pack here, which comes down as a zip file. So it's going to save to my downloads folder, so I'll get that in a moment when it's come in. But what I want to do, as I show in Finder after it's downloaded, is to put that into my Maya folder. So if I go back to my development folder, into the Maya folder, and I have a folder in there called source images. Now this is where Maya will naturally look for objects of graphics. I'm just going to unarchive that 7Z, which is a zip file, and that will unzip those. So I'll drop that whole folder into my source images, and then when I go back to Maya, I can use that within Maya here as well. So I've got a grey cube at the moment. What I want to do is give that a texture, so I'm going to right click on that. If I right click on that, I get a menu here, and I can say assign new material, and then I'm going to let go on that one. Then it gives me the options on what type of material we want to work with. Now I'm going to go a bit more into this in depth in a later tutorial, but at the moment I'm just going to select a Lambert. I'm selecting Lambert because it doesn't have a reflective property, and it just works in a slightly easier way to start with. So it says Lambert 2. I'm going to change this texture stone. And it's really worth renaming items, so everything has a unique name and it actually represents what you're working with. Now with the object selected, using the attribute editor, I've selected the object. If I want to come back to this, I can find that on the end of the list of text attributes, which is the Lambert here, which is connected. Now one thing I can do, I can change the color of that. I can fade it from white to black, or darken and lighten an item. I can change the color. If I wanted a pure color, I can work with that in there. Just change that and use a color wheel or select different colors. This is a very simple way of working. But if I want something more complicated, I want to link this cube to the image that I've downloaded. So from the color tab here, I can click on this checker box. I can click on File. Here, it's giving me the 2D and 3D textures. So the node that I want is to click on File, and then from there, it's going to ask me what image I want to work with. So it automatically looks in my source images folder because I have this project set up at the beginning. So I'll open this folder here. I'm just going to pick this one here, and then we've got a few different options. Again, we're going to go through these in a bit more detail when we look more at textures. But the diffuse is the main color that we're looking at. The other ones work in different ways to affect different aspects. So we're just going to use diffuse for now, and this is going to demonstrate how that might come across from there. And this is giving us this image here from the source images folder, and it's placing it on this cube here. We can't actually see it in the viewport until we turn on textures for that. So if I click on this aspect up here, this icon up here, it will apply that to this object. Now I'm not saying this is the perfect texture for this, but it will work and it will help what we're doing. So now I'll save the file because we've made slight changes to it, and then I'm going to go to File, send to Unity, send selection, and this time I'm going to embed the media in this file. I'm going to say embed media, check that box, and that will save this image with that FBX as it comes across. Now sometimes this isn't what you want to do. Sometimes you want to have a very clean model and a texture separately, but I'm going to send this across in this way because at the moment and at this level we are looking for a bit of simplicity and work with that. So if I export Cube 3 to the Unity project, when I go back to Unity, hopefully it's finished importing the standard assets, we can find the file we've been working with, again my Cube 3, and drop this one into the scene. So that's come across over there. So if I look within the project window of the cube, I can see if I open this up, I can see the hierarchy, I can see there is a texture for stone. But I'll just go back to the top bit there, and I can see the import settings for this. Again, we looked at scaling an object, but in this case it's got materials. I can extract textures and materials. So use embedded materials. I can extract that texture here. It's asking me where I want to save it. Choose that one there. It's actually saved out that diffuse model now as well. So now that's actually brought that in the way that I expected it to. If I focus on that, I can see that in there as I was working with that. So again, we will work more with textures soon, but then if I'm building up a scene within that, that will come in. So I'm just going to save this scene here. Demo workflow. So this is just simply cubes, but I'm working out how to bring aspects at the right size. And just to test that that's the right size, I want to work with some of the standard Unity assets that I'm working with. The standard assets has a folder here, and within that we have something called characters, first person character, and within that we have prefabs. I'll get a bit more detail on prefabs in the future, but I'm just going to pick up this FBS controller. I'm going to drop it into my scene. And that comes into the origin over there. It's got the 0 position. I'm going to drag that slightly away from these cubes. So this is basically a capsule with an audio listener. See that here, and a camera attached to it as well. So that's basically what this is made up of. So we can see the elements of that as we come in here as well. So the camera is showing where it's looking, and it has a rigid body around that so it can detect when it's touching things. That's really what that's made up of. But we should be able to see now through that as the game engine starts. The last thing I want to do is just to build up a floor. Again, from standard assets, we have this item called prototyping, and in their prefabs we can have a floor type. So I'm going to take one of the larger floor types and drop that into the scene. So that may be able to hold my item, but I'll just drop the floor slightly, or I might need to raise the other objects up, but so that the first person controller will balance. So now when I press play, it will come into this game mode, and I'll be able to move around, and by moving the mouse I can see where I am, and I can just move around the scene, look about and move, press spacebar to jump, and I can start working up how that's working as well. So this gives me the kind of idea that I do have a good scale. So similarly, if I stop that, I'll press escape so I can get the mouse back and stop that one. I'll press save again from the save menu, or I used Apple S. So now if I go back to Maya, I can get a much better idea of what scales I'm working to. The other thing that I sometimes do is bring in a reference model. So if I go into Windows, we can get a lot of aspects in there. Windows General Editors, Content Browser. this has some standard items that I may want to use, and within that we have examples. And so I'm going to use a base mesh of a character which I know is a fairly standard size. So I'm going to import this one. So this is probably about 1.8 meters high. So I right clicked it there, and then it gave me an option to import it. So I did that. And then in my scene, press that, press F, I have this character in there as well. So I'm seeing how large that is. I'm going to move it away from that cube, and so I can just see that it's coming in on the origin. So I'll press undo just to send it back. And this time I'm going to send to Unreal Selection. Now this is a useful, I'm just going to type in reference character. This is a useful way of working because it allows me to both see this in Maya and Unity and just get the idea of scales between it, and I'll just check that that comes across in the right way there. So the reference character here, when I drop that into my scene, I'll get an idea of how tall that is. That's coming in at the origin. So these cubes I've been working with have been coming in off-centered, but I can probably bring that floor, I'm in the scene mode, I can bring the floor back up to 0. That should rest on where that character is. If I want to do that numerically, it's very quick to do, and I can adjust these boxes. What I'll do, I'll just put them in different positions around the scene, and that will allow me to see them at different angles, so I get a better orientation. So I'll leave that in there. So now when I press play, I'm getting a good idea of scale, and the same scale will be what I've got in Maya. So if I do turn around and look in the direction of that character, just rotate the mouse around. I think I've gone the long way around this way. Yep, it stood right next to me, and I can see how that feels as I go up to him. And yeah, so the head's in about the right space, so as I'm there, it would be in the right space. So that really gives me the reference of how big I should be working with objects. So now I press escape and stop, and then I can save the scene again. So back in Maya now, I can start working on a scene that is the actuality of what I want to work with. So often I will lock that character so I can't select it, but I'm just going to bring this floor down and just work with this. So this is going to need to be if I work with this as a cube, it needs to be at -50 because it's 100 in height, and the center of it is in the center of the object. So I'm just taking that down -50 so that I have a platform or a floor plane for this character. Then I can scale this object. So I want this floor to be reasonably long and wide, so I've got a bit of scope on it for movement. I'm going to make it 4 dimensions in that way. The height, which is the Y, I'm not going to adjust, but I will adjust the distance. So you can see my texture has changed there. So I've got a very stretched texture, and this is a tileable texture, so I might want to change that as I go back. So we've got to go back to texture stone, click on the color options here, and it's got a tab called place 2D texture. Now repeat UV, I had about 4 width and 200 length. That will bring it back into a normal mode. So now I've got that tiled as a floor within my scene. So again, I'm going to just save that scene. And another tip is, if you want to save your scene, go into save scene and click this box here, which gives you the options for the function of save scene. And I've got this thing called incremental save on. So that means it saves a new version of the file each time I save it. So I've got a backup version saved in the scene as well. And I can see this depth here This height here has got a lot of texture. It hasn't not showing the textures, but there is actually that texture there, but it's very squashed because of the way the UVs are working. So again, we're going to work with UVs in the future, but in this case we're not going to look at that in too much detail. So I'm going to build another cube. It's a very tiny cube. If I wanted to, I could set the options on the create polygon primitive mode. So I can click the square there and I can tell it to start with a height of 300, and that would be 3 meters, and that will give me a good dimension for that. And also I'm going to start with 100, so it's a meter wide as well. So now if I press create, that will come in, and that's a piece of geometry. I'm going to lift up so I can get a good idea of ceiling. So in a game I might want a character to run and jump, so I can bring that across and place it reasonably where I was going to work with it. Now I picked slightly the wrong dimensions, so again in the attribute editor I can change this. I want it to be deeper. I'm going to put in 200 here than it is wide, so I'm just going to bring that back to 10. The depth is 2000. So between Maya and Unity I'm having to add in extra couple of zeros on the end of my objects in Maya because I'm working in centimeters. So again that is working. And just to recap how I'm working with the objects in the textures as I'm going forward, I'm going to right click on that scene here. It's actually changed mode there, so I don't need to have it in object mode. Turn blue, it needs to be green. I'm right clicking that and holding it down, holding down the right click and letting go and pressing assign new material. So this is me bringing in another Lambert and selecting the checkerboard again and linking it up to a different file within that. So I'll make sure I just click it, left click, and again select file, and in this case it's gone onto the place 2D texture, but I'm going to reset this one to a different pattern, and so that one we'll use for the wall for now, and that should come in. And again it's stretched, so what I can do, I've lost where that is. If I've lost where that, I can go to place 2D texture or select the object and then follow through the Lambert 3 to where the placement coverage is. So in terms of length, I think we had 200, and let's try 6. We'll see what that looks like. That looks very blurred. Doesn't quite seem to work. That may be stretching it way too much or not enough. So it was a very long texture. I'm going to try adding in a couple of zeros there, and okay, so that texture is not really showing up particularly how I'd expect it, and it may show up better when I render that. So I'm just going to take that back to what I thought it should be, and just see how that comes out when it actually comes across to Unity. So now I'm setting up something that will probably work quite well as a side scroller. I've got haven't put a ceiling in yet, but we can actually have a camera looking for an object as we're going. So I'm working with cubes at the moment, so it actually would tend to block off one of the view through aspects. So this time I'm going to use something called a plane, polygon plane. So I'm going to create polygon primitive plane. Again, this is going to be tiny. So I will give it a width of 2000, a height of what should I do before 300, or maybe 400, And then I'm going to just position this so that we can see it. Now what we're going to do is use this as an example of polygon normals. Now I'm trying to do that by hand using that the tools, but actually if I want to get a useful exactness, then I need to use the numbers there as well. So I might want to have a wall inside the scene. I'll just overlap that slightly because we won't see that join. So we can see which way how that's working. Now on this side it's very black, and I think the normals for this, which is what will show up in Unity, are coming out in this direction. So I'll just do another test. I'll right click this, assign new material, just so it does come in with a material. Select Lambert, it's called Lambert 4. I'm going to call that inside wall. I just remembered I didn't name the Lambert on this other one. Click on the checkerboard, click on the file, and I should be able to link that to a different texture. So I'm just picking different ones so we get the variety in the scene, and so we can see how that works. Now this one here, you can see that it's only showing up on one side. So I'm going to show you, oh no, it's showing up dark on that side. But if I select these objects, so I'm holding down the left mouse and dragging those objects, I can also, if I have this button pressed, panel layout, I should be able to get the outliner. It hasn't worked, but if you get the outliner to show in this panel, then you can select your objects from here as well. So these are the objects I want. That one, if I shift click, it should select each of them. So shift left click, that's showing me the ones that I'm working with. So now I'm going to again do this as center Unity, and then we'll see how we can fix some of those issues we may have had. So this is going to be our set design, set 1, or you might call it level, or you call it what you want. And I'll just check. I did that so quickly that I didn't check to see if I had the embed media on. I've actually changed that since I did the last one, so I'll just oversave that, click on the one that I want to oversave with embed media selected, and export selection. Do I want to replace it? Yes. So coming back into Unity, I will have this one here, set 1, and it's got that, and it's got the textures and materials in there as well. So as I did before, I will probably need to extract those textures, but I'll drop that into the scene, and I can see that there is some aspect going on there. I can see this aspect here. This is what I was talking about with normals and what I want to adjust with that. So I can see that on one side because it's got a plane and it's slightly in the way. So I'm going to bring down that prototyping floor and just look back here. And so I've got some adjustments that I will want to make. There's a very stretched texture on this aspect of this wall, which may show up when I look at the Lambert 3 shader. And if I extract materials as well, it should show up. And then I can probably adjust how they're working. So the tiling on that here I can adjust within this. And the offsets as well. But the main thing I now want to show you is about these normals, because that's not how I want it to look. I want it to look as if I can see through that on one aspect but not in another. So within Maya, any flat plane will have a normal aspect which will show, so where this red line showing, that's the direction you will see the image. So Maya's actually doing it on all aspects. But because we're working on cubes, this is always pointing to the outside. On a plane, it won't be working in that way. So what we need to do is look at the normals of that. I think it'll be mesh tools, or find those ones. Mesh display. So go to mesh display. If I go down onto this bar here, we'll be able to see where they are. And the function I'm going to do is tell it to reverse the normals so it goes to the other side. Admittedly, you could rotate that round 180 degrees and that will get the same effect, but we just want to be able to see how this works in practice. We can also go to show or display on polygons normals, face normals. It's right here. So display polygons face normals. I click on that. It should show up with a little green icon in there. So it's quite a small icon, but you see that that dot on this side is pointing out beyond the item, because we're working such a large scale. It's not actually showing through, but you can see that those are pointing out from this aspect. But essentially, we're going to mesh display, reversing those, and we'll see that those have flipped over, and now we should be able to see those as we go forward. There will be a setting that you can change the face normals as well. The length of those normal indicators. So I'll save the scene. I will select the items I'm sending and send to Unity selection. I'm going to overwrite the set there, export selection, replace it, and now when I go back into Unity it should re-import that file, and now it's invisible from this perspective and I can see it in that one. So that's great, because when I'm working on a scene, or if I was having a camera looking at a side view of a scene, I can see through that object. This one on the other side is a cube, so the planes are facing, it's got a plane facing out this way and a plane facing out the other way. And I can press play and I should be able to see how that works, as long as my first person controller is in the right place, which it isn't. So I will walk through. So we can see that in here we can work with that, and we can see those aspects on the other side. So it's got quite a high jump. The other thing I'm going to do is look at the import settings before I finally fix that tiling on that graphic there. The import settings of this set as well. I want this to be solid. I want it to be able to jump on it. So what I need to do is generate colliders. These are things, objects that would mean that I can't walk through it. So I select generate colliders, press apply, and then I'm going to bring my first person controller into the correct place when it starts, because it was walking, he or she was walking through the scene as it goes. So I'll just bring that just forward of this. So what I've got here is these lines coming out. That shows where it's looking in the first place. So I'm going to bring it behind that character. And what I find, there might be a little jump on the beginning as this character lands, the first person controller lands, but it should also allow me to be at the right level. And if I go to the side, I'm not walking through the geometry of the scene. And also I have some obstacles that I might climb up. Depending on the settings of the character, I may be able to walk over that step there and not make that much difference. So again, if I press escape to get the mouse control back, press stop, save that scene and go back to Maya. I really want to clear up this texture on this item here, which is Lambert 3. So I'm just going to call that inside wall. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to normalize this here, and I'm going to do some of the work in Unity. I'm going to go back to place 2D texture. going to give it 1 and 1. So what I do with that in its normal state, I will send that back over to Unity, and then I can work with the tiling attributes within Unity. So this is finally sending the selection over. Set 1, export selection, and when I go back to Unity now, it does that small import, and it should have updated this part here. But if I look at the cube, so I'm looking at cube 3 is the one I'm working with, and I can see this inside wall here. I should be able to look at that again. So if I extract the material from that, oh, it's got a different name now, hasn't it? So maybe it needed that to be done. I'll extract both. I have extracted the same texture already, so I maybe didn't need to do that. But within the model, that should be working. Generate colliders. Oh no, I'm using the wrong one. I should be using set. So it's got generate colliders on. Materials, extract, choose. Just in case, I'll extract the textures again. And then when I'm working with that cube, I should be able to open up this here, and I should be able to set the tiling of that. So in the X dimension, put it to 20, then it actually comes into a normal, although slightly large size. So if I wanted that to be 10 in that dimension and 200 in that dimension, I start to get a fairly normal looking wall within that. So that's using the tiling settings within Unity as opposed to Maya. Also, it's showing me this back face culling, which doesn't show the back faces, and allows me to set up a system where I can actually move around. So within this video, it should really help you get up and running with Unity, using some of the standard assets to start moving around and making something that is interactive, and also working out how to set up projects for Maya and Unity and get that workflow seamlessly going. What we will be looking at in the future is just how to generate more detailed textures, how to actually start modeling beyond cubes and planes. But we've got an idea of textures, we've got an idea of normal maps and how things show up. And that we'll cover in more detail and look at in the future.